image is described as 7 feet tall and has the body of an owl and the face of a woman.
The Lady in White.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the corpse train. Now, according to London folklore, in the early 1900s there was a train that ran underneath the city and it was only for dead people. Back then, London's hospitals and morgues were struggling to deal with the vast amount of people that were dying from poverty and disease. They decided to transport the bodies out of the city, but knew that they couldn't do it overground without disturbing a lot of people. So they used an existing train line to load the bodies onto. The train ran just the other side of a wall from the normal daily service, where unsuspecting Londoners were getting on and off their trains unaware of the nearby bodies. Next up at number 9 now, we have the suicide pool. This one comes from Epping Forest near Essex. The story goes that years ago, a young couple in love were followed to a pond in the forest by the girl's father. When the couple finally embraced, the father leapt from the trees to confront the boy. The fight got out of hand and the father ended up killing the boy in a rage at the edge of the pool. The waters then turned black. Wildlife that was touching the water died instantly. In the years that followed, bodies started to appear in the water. First it was an old woman, then a young one with her young child beside her. They say the pool drew them into their death and that the pool is still out there in the forest somewhere waiting for its next victim. Next up at number 8 now, we have Annie. This one comes from Edinburgh, Scotland. In the old town there lies a street known as Mary King's Close. It's steeped in myths and legends of hauntings and murders. In 1990, a psychic called Aiko Gibo visited and felt a small hand touch hers. She said that she then made contact with the spirit of a dead child called Annie who had died in a plague hundreds of years ago and had lost her doll. The psychic then went to a nearby shop and brought back a Barbie doll for her. Now since then, visitors leave dolls for Annie and a mountain of them has built up in the dark. At number 7 now, we have the Charman. This story goes that in 1948 a wildfire swept across Ojai, California. The flames consumed a cabin where a man lived with his son. He was burned alive, but the son survived, just barely though. When the authorities arrived, they found a shocking scene. The father had been flayed alive. His skin had been removed from his body and peeled off. His body was just hanging from a nearby tree. The police then searched for the perpetrator. They heard a wheezing sound from a nearby bush, and then suddenly the son just bolted out of it. The overpowering smell of him stunned the officers, and in that moment the boy ran into the trees and then escaped into the hills. In the years since then, many locals have said they've seen the Charman in the woods, horribly disfigured by his burns and tormented by his past. He's said to creep up on the tents of innocent campers in the hills, waiting for them to fall asleep. Coming at number 6 now, we have Hell's Gate Bridge. This one comes from Oxford, Alabama. The story goes that in the 1950s, a young couple crashed their car off the side of this bridge and drowned. Now, some locals believe you cross the bridge at your own peril. One story is that if you drive your car out to the middle of the bridge and then turn off all the lights, the couple will appear in your car just sitting behind you. When you turn around, they'll be gone, leaving a wet seat behind. The other story is that if you drive over the bridge and then look over your shoulder about halfway through, the scenery behind you turns into a portal to hell, just spouting fire and flames. Now, whether or not you believe all of this, it's enough for some people to just look for a different way to cross the river. Moving on to number 5 now, we have 100 Steps Cemetery. This is located in the town of Brazil in Indiana. Interesting name for a town, and the cemetery is even more interesting. It's been used for at least 150 years, and in that time it's gained quite a sinister reputation for a ghostly undertaker. The story goes that as you walk up the many steps to the top of the cemetery, you must count each and every step. When you reach the top, you must turn towards the open field, and then the ghost of the cemetery's first undertaker will appear. Without saying anything, he will then reveal your own death to you in a vision. Straight away you must proceed back down the steps and count each one again. If the number is different to the one that you counted on the way up, the vision was true. An added bonus is that if anyone tries to cheat and climb up or down without using the steps, a ghostly hand will push them to the ground, leaving a red imprint on their back for days as a mark of the devil. Definitely not a place to go for just a Sunday walk then. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Goat Man of Pope Lick. I love my job because I get to say sentences like that. This is an old Kentucky urban legend about a hideous being who roams the woods across that state. Those who have seen him describe the Goat Man as having dark fur, pale skin, goat legs and twisted horns. Some people say he was an escaped circus freak, others say he was a farmer who tortured goats for Satan. Satan then repaid him by turning him into a tortured goat himself. The Goat Man is said to hide under the rusty bridge that crosses Pope Lick Creek in Louisville. Legend says he lures people onto the train tracks there and then takes pleasure in them being hit by oncoming trains. Please don't go looking for this one though, guys. In 2016, a woman actually fell to her death from the bridge while looking for the goat man. At number 3 now, we have Slaughterhouse Canyon. With a name like that, you know it's not going to be a pretty story. During the 1800s gold rush, a family lived in the canyon there in a little wooden shack. Every day was the same. The husband would set off into the mountains to search for gold and food for his family. Then, one day, he just didn't come back, presumably injured or killed by animals, the mountain, or even other humans. His wife waited for her husband for weeks until the whole family began to starve. Driven mad with the hunger and her children's cries, she put on her wedding dress, picked up a knife, and murdered her children, throwing them into the river, and then weeping until starvation killed her too. Legend says that if you visit the canyon today, you can still hear the mother's painful cries. Alright, next up at number 2 now, we have the Black Angel. This statue looks very creepy as it is. An old, worn, corroded angel staring down over Oakland Cemetery in Iowa City. Her sinister appearance has helped spawn a number of different legends around her. One of them says that a pregnant woman should never walk under her lest they want to lose their unborn child. Another says that if you kiss or perhaps even just touch the statue, you'll be dead within 6 months. This is the kind of story that scares everyone off. Whether or not you believe in curses, it's just not even worth thinking about. And finally, number 1 now, we have Cropsey. Many New Yorkers know the story of Cropsey, the boogeyman of Staten Island. Legend says that he was an escaped patient from a mental asylum who went on a murderous rampage. He had a hook for a hand, which he would then use to drag children back to the abandoned ruins of Seaview Hospital. Pretty creepy stuff, but here's where it gets really scary. Many parents would tell this story to their kids to scare them into being cautious about strangers, even if they didn't really believe the story themselves. But then in the 1970s, a real killer called Andre Rand really did start hunting children in a very similar way. Was he using the Cropsey legend as cover? Either way, people now take the legend a lot more seriously.
And we're kicking off this list with the Scandinavian Ganganger. Ganganger, that's a hard word to say. Might be mispronouncing it. Originating in the folklore of Scandinavia, particularly Norway and Sweden, the Ganganger is believed to be the embodiment of a deceased individual who returns from the grave to haunt the living. These spectral beings typically manifest with a pale complexion, dressed in tattered burial garments. They're often associated with unfinished business or unresolved grievances, seeking retribution or closure. It kind of sounds like a normal ghost, but they actually are very, very different. Legend has it that encountering one of these beings brings great misfortune and even death to those who cross its path. Instead of just appearing in the background of photographs or whispering incoherent sentences into spirit boxes like your regular old vanilla ghosts, the Ganganger are malicious spirits that can actually cause physical harm. The mere sight of these spectral beings is said to invoke a profound sense of dread and foreboding, as they are believed to possess this malevolent intent, even towards loved ones. Efforts to ward off or appease one of these beings have been present in Scandinavian folklore for centuries. Traditional rituals like offering prayers, performing protective charms, or conducting burial rites were believed to provide some defense against their haunting presence. At number 9, we have A Letter from a Blind Man. This one is short, but man, is it chilling. A dark tale that began circulating just after one of the darkest periods in modern history. In post-World War II in Berlin, a time plagued by scarcity, poverty, and hunger, a tale spoke of a young woman who encountered a blind man navigating his way through a bustling crowd. The two ended up striking a conversation, leading the man to ask if she could deliver a letter to the specified address on the envelope for him. Considering it was conveniently on her route home, she agreed to help. As she turned to walk away though, she craned her head back momentarily to see if there was anything else she could assist the blind man with, and to her astonishment, she caught sight of him hastily making his way through the crowd without his dark glasses or his white cane. Understandably, she was pretty suspicious at this point and headed over to report the incident to the authorities. The police swiftly raided the address mentioned in the letter, where they uncovered a gruesome discovery. In the home were piles of human flesh intended for sale, and within the envelope entrusted to the young woman was a chilling message that read, this is the last one I'm sending you today. The Beast of Gavaudan, terrifying creature's tale, has become a blend of fact, fiction, and folklore. The legend speaks of a monstrous beast that haunted the rural landscape of Gavaudan, a region in south-central France, during the mid-18th century. According to the stories, the creature possessed an insatiable appetite for human flesh, targeting women and children as its preferred victims. Descriptions varied, but many accounts depicted a fearsome creature resembling a massive-sized wolf or a hybrid predator, possibly with blood-red eyes and a black stripe running down its back. Its ruthless attacks, coupled with its supposed invincibility against conventional weaponry, left the people in a state of dread, desperation, and as the legend grew, so did the attempts to bring an end to the creature's reign of terror. Countless hunters, soldiers, and villagers embarked on these journeys to track down and take out the beast, yet the creature thwarted their efforts time and time again, evading traps, bullets, and even organized hunts. The legend reached its climax when a local hunter named Jean Chastel claimed to have slain the beast using a silver bullet. Over the years, the legend of the Beast of Gavaudan has been dissected by historians, mythologists, and enthusiasts, giving rise to various theories about the true nature of the creature. And apparently this did happen, it's just we're not quite sure if it was some sort of paranormal creature, like a werewolf, or if it was just a particularly large rogue wolf.
Moving on to number 7 now, we have The Faceless Woman. This one comes from the borough of Barking in London. There you can find Beacon Tree Station, home to the Faceless Woman. The most famous sighting of her happened in 1992. A station supervisor reported that on one night he heard the handle of his office door rattle. Outside on the platform stood a woman. She had blonde hair, she wore a very pale dress and just stared into the distance. The supervisor approached her, but as he reached out, she turned to him only to reveal she had no face, just darkness where there should be one. Local ghost hunters claim that she is the victim of a train crash that happened there in 1958 which killed 10 people. At number 6 now we have The Beast. England's Hackney Marshes is known for its sprawling woodland and boggy reed marshes often covered in swirling fog, the perfect setting for this urban legend. The story goes that in 1980, 2 bear carcasses were found in the river. They had been decapitated. People started speculating about who or what could cut a bear's head clean off its shoulders. Then a year later, 4 boys were taking a walk along the marsh one winter morning when they saw it through the trees. They described it as a giant, great, growling, hairy thing. As soon as it saw them, it reared up on its back legs and let out a deafening roar. The boys ran, but the story remains, always in the back of people's minds as they trudged through the marsh. We're returning now to the London Underground for our number 5 with The Crying Girl. On November 18th, 1987, a match was dropped on an escalator at London's King Cross station. A fire quickly spread into the nearby ticket office, which resulted in the death of 31 people. In the years since then, passengers have reported seeing a girl who died around the station. She has long brown hair, wears jeans and a t-shirt, and is always crying. Some people have even reported hearing her sobs while smelling smoke coming out from the escalators. Back to Scotland now for our number 4 with Sawney Bean. This is the gruesome tale of Alexander Sawney Bean, a man who was said to be the head of a Scottish clan of cannibals in medieval times. According to legend, the group was made up of his wife, their 14 children and 32 grandchildren, some of whom were born through incest. They lived in a cave by the water and would ambush people on the road at night. They would bring their bodies back to the cave to then dismember and eat them. Any leftovers were pickled in a jar for later. When King James VI of Scotland eventually heard of these murders, he led a manhunt to capture them. The clan was caught and then executed. Some people say you can still find the cave along the Benane Head area of Scotland. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Cane Hill. Some say this is one of the most haunted places in England. It was a mental asylum for over 100 years from 1882 to 1991. It built up a reputation for abandoning some of its patients, hiding them away from the public eye and never truly helping them. Some people say the patients who died left their energy behind there because of their tortured lives. The building was gutted by a mysterious fire in 2010. Perhaps the scariest stories of all are of the faces appearing by the burnt out windows. Next up at number 2 now, we have the House of the Screaming Skull. This one comes from Bettiscombe Manor in Dorset, England. The legend goes that in 1830, a man lived there called John Frederick Pinney. He had a slave that he had brought back from the Caribbean island of Nevis. The man became ill, and on his deathbed he swore he would never rest unless his body was returned home to Nevis. Pinney refused to pay for that expense, and when he died, he had the man buried in the local graveyard. After that, ill fortune began to plague the village for months. Screams and cries were heard from the cemetery. At the manor house, windows rattled and doors kept slamming. The body was dug up and brought to the manor house, where today only the skull remains, where it's said to haunt the manor, but the village remains safe. And finally at number 1 now, we have the Hellhounds. Dartmoor is a vast, rocky, windy and mysterious part of England. It's popular among tourists, but everyone who goes there is aware of the legend of the Hellhounds. It's said that a pack of these ghost dogs wanders the moors at night, preying on sheep, and they're not afraid of humans. They've often been described as cat-like, but with the frame of a bear, and very fast. There have been pictures and film taken of them over the years that claim to show glimpses of these hellhounds in action. Many of the locals don't even need that though. They've heard the stories handed down from generation to generation. Some of them even say they've seen the hounds with their own 2 eyes. Starting off number 10 now, we have the taxi passenger. The story goes that one night a taxi driver was working late, and as the clock ticked down to midnight, he suddenly saw a beautiful young woman standing at the corner of a traffic light junction. She had long black hair and a flowing white dress. He asked her if she needed a ride. She got in without a word. The taxi driver asked where she wanted to go. The girl simply handed him a piece of paper. It had a number and the name of a road on it. The taxi driver wasn't sure where it was and asked if she could help him. She nodded. She kept nodding every time he went the correct way, but never actually said a word. They finally reached the road. It was very narrow, just enough for one car to pass down, and it was dark. There were no working streetlights. A mist engulfed the car. He tried to peer through the fog and see the numbers on the houses, but to his horror, there were none, just rows and rows of gravestones. He was gripped with fear and nervously asked if this was the right place. No answer came from the back seat. He continued to drive slowly, but then felt a tap on his shoulder. Too scared to turn around, he stopped the car. He heard the rustle of money and felt her hand giving him some cash. He threw it down without even counting it. He heard the back door open and then close. He then sped home without looking back. The next morning, curiosity got the better of him and he returned to the same street. It was indeed a large cemetery. He found the lot number that the girl had given him. His eyes widened in horror as he saw the woman's picture staring back at him from a fresh gravestone. He later found out the girl had died the week before in a horrific accident at the very same junction he had picked her up from. It was a hit and run, and the driver was never caught. Moving on to number 9 now, we have the yellow Volkswagen on Karak Highway. For many Malaysians, the Karak Highway is the most haunted road in the country. This is in part due to it having the highest accident rate in the whole of Malaysia. Aside from the reports of an eerie feeling along the road, there are some more solid stories. Perhaps the most famous is that of the yellow Volkswagen. The story goes that if you see this yellow car on the road, it will block your lane. It will then begin to slow down to a snail's pace, forcing you to overtake it. Once you do that, you'll continue on for a while until it happens again. The same yellow car will be blocking you, it will slow down, you will go past it, and then it happens again and again. After a few times you'll realise that it's actually just the same car, and what's even more creepy is that there appears to be nobody driving it. The only way to stop the cycle is to actually not overtake it. Some say that when you are overtaking it, the car will speed up and disappear into darkness. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Lang Suya. This is said to be the ghost of a woman who died while giving birth to a stillborn child. The mother's grief turns her into a sort of flying banshee creature. On the surface, she will look like a beautiful woman with long nails, hair down to her ankles, and dressed all in green. However, don't be fooled by their beauty. The Lang Suya haunts coastal areas and attacks pregnant women out of jealousy. People believe you can stop a pregnant woman's corpse from becoming a Lang Suya though. You need to place beads in her mouth, an egg in each armpit, and needles on her hands. This should make it possible for her to pass on peacefully to the afterlife. If everything fails, there is said to be one way to fight a Lang Suya. You cut off her long nails and stuff her hair hair into the hole in the back of her neck.
Number 7. The Well to Hell. The Well to Hell urban legend was spread through whispers, emails, and internet forums. According to the legend, in 1989, a team of Russian scientists drilled a hole deep in an unknown location in Siberia, and as they delved deeper into the Earth's crust, they allegedly pierced a barrier that unleashed unimaginable horrors. The story goes that as the drill reached an astonishing depth, the temperature spiked dramatically and strange sounds began emanating from the hole. The team lowered a heat-tolerant microphone down into the hole, and disturbingly, the team claimed to have detected agonizing screams of tormented souls and eerie demonic voices rising from the depths. Terrified, they quickly withdrew the drill, fearing that they had inadvertently opened a gateway to hell itself. There is an audio recording of this supposed hellish audio, and spoiler alert, it's been ruled as a hoax. However, it is pretty unsettling to listen to. I remember hearing this years and years ago when I was a kid, and it kind of freaked me out. Next on the list, we have The Faceless Woman. This story takes place in the London Underground at Beacon Tree Station. The story goes that a station supervisor was working the late shift, minding his own business, when the door to his office started to shake. First, he just brushed it off, thinking it was just the rumble of passing trains on other lines, but when the door didn't stop rattling, even into the wee hours of the morning when no more trains were running, the worker decided probably time to leave. He headed up to the upper office where his coworker was stationed, and as he was making his way up the staircase, he just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Someone was trailing behind him. He turned around and was greeted by a disturbing sight. A woman stood below him with long blonde hair and without a face, standing just a few feet away. He suddenly dashed up the stairs in a panic before finally finding safety in the top office. Once there, colleague could see the fear in his face before asking him, "Did you see a woman with long blonde hair and no face?" Next up is the Vanishing Hotel Room, aka the Vanishing Lady. This legend began circulating in the late 1800s, taking place in France. Like with most urban legends, there are multiple versions of the tale, but it goes something like this. A mother and daughter had recently arrived in Paris. They check into a hotel, but pretty soon the mother begins feeling ill, collapses. A doctor arrives who informs the daughter that her mother will need medicine. That can only be picked up at the other end of town. The daughter sets out to get the medicine, but when she returns to the hotel hours later, her mother is no longer there. In a panic, she asks the staff where her mother is, but they all claim not to know who she's talking about. According to them, the girl had arrived at the hotel on her own. In some versions of the story, the girl suffers a mental breakdown and ends up at a mental institution. In another version of the legend, it is revealed that the mother had actually died of the Black Plague, and the hotel tried to cover it up by disposing of her body and pretending like they'd never seen her in order to avoid bad publicity. At number 4, we have the Russian sleep experiment. This story began circulating online, and according to the chilling tale, in 1947, Soviet researchers conducted a classified experiment in which 5 subjects were kept awake for an extended period of time. The goal was to test the effects of sleep deprivation on human physiology and their mental state. Days turned into weeks, however. The subjects began to exhibit disturbing behavior. They became increasingly paranoid and delusional, plagued by hallucinations and exhibiting signs of extreme psychological distress. Desperate attempts to stay awake led to self-mutilation as they tore into their own flesh, driven to madness by their sleep-deprived states. The most horrifying twist in the legend comes when the researchers decided to release a gas into the chamber in order to induce sleep. However, instead of providing relief, the gas triggered a nightmarish frenzy of violence. The researchers entered the room only to find one man still standing. The bodies of the other 4 men, or at least what remained of them, lay strewn about the room. Next, we have another urban legend from the London Underground, the Crying Girl of King's Cross Station. In 1987, deep underground underground in the tunnels of the London subway at King's Cross Station, a fire had broken out. The fire took the lives of 31 people, and some say they still hear the wails and cries of the poor souls who lost their lives there, especially the crying woman. Late at night, when the platform is mostly deserted, some say they spot a woman dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, sobbing into the night, the echoes of her cries reverberating off the long, empty tunnels. When they go to approach her, though, she simply disappears. Coming in at number 2, we have the Black Volga. The urban legend of the Black Volga is a chilling tale that is circulated in various parts of the world, but particularly in Eastern Europe. According to the legend, a menacing black luxury car, often identified as a Volga sedan, prowls the streets at night, instilling fear in all who cross its path. The Black Volga is said to be driven by mysterious figures, frequently described as malevolent entities or agents of the supernatural. Witnesses claim that the vehicle appears seemingly out of nowhere, its engine roaring ominously as it glides silently through the darkness. The car's windows are tinted, hiding the occupants from view and shrouding their intentions in secrecy. Terrifying encounters with the Black Volga involve tales of kidnappings, disappearances, or even encounters with supernatural beings. Some versions of the legend suggest that the car is driven by vampires or other supernatural creatures preying on unsuspecting victims in the dead of night. Some have actually theorized that perhaps the Polish secret police spread these more outlandish legends in order to invalidate claims of genuine kidnappings carried out by the government. And at number 1, we have the Catacombs video. Now, this video really does exist. It's just the person behind the camera who's never been identified, which has led to multiple theories about the circumstances of this case. Is it just a hoax, or was this actually a man who got lost in the catacombs, never to be seen again? This is one most of you have probably heard of, but it's a story that's always stuck with me. One that chilled me to the bone when I first heard about it and watched footage. The video is said to have been filmed in the early 90s, possibly 1993. In the black and white footage, we see a POV of the cameraman as he makes his way through the dark tunnels of the Paris catacombs. Soon, though, his breathing begins to intensify and he picks up his pace, now running aimlessly through the tunnels until he finally drops his camera altogether. Continuing to run further into the darkness, the camera continues to record until the battery dies. The camera was found later on, and searches were made for this mysterious man, but no body was ever discovered. All right, we're going to start things off with what is known as the Paulding Light, or the Dog Meadow Lights to locals. So this is a strange, unexplained light that locals will observe all the time. There's a freaky ghost story connected to it as well, and we'll get to that, but let me just stress that these lights aren't just something people talk about. There's plenty of video of the phenomenon. So yeah, look at that. It's kind of wild. This video here was posted by Johnny Shocker. In the description, he talks about how he'd seen the light on more than one occasion and that it would float towards him, like floating in midair, then it would vanish, only to reappear and repeat the same process. So there's a lot of local folklore surrounding this mysterious light. Probably the most well-known is the tale of the railroad brakeman. At one time there were railroad tracks in the area, and one chilly night, the brakeman, with lantern in hand, spotted an oncoming train. But there were railway cars stopped on the tracks. He tried desperately to signal to the train, waving his lantern back and forth, but unfortunately he didn't get out of the way on time before being bulldozed by the train, which is kind of his fault. Like, you see the train coming from that far away and you can't just like hop out of the way. I know you're doing your job, but at some point you gotta put yourself first, you know? Alright, couldn't do this list without talking about the Michigan Triangle. Just like the infamous Bermuda Triangle, this is a section of Lake Michigan where all sorts of strange phenomena have taken place. Some are just stories, but there are very real occurrences as well. Missing planes, ships, people. There have also been a number of reported UFO sightings in this triangular section of the lake. The most famous ships to disappear in the area include the Le Griffin, which vanished into thin air, last seen on September 18th of 1679. The wreckage was never found. The most famous incident involving a plane is the Flight 2501 incident. This was a flight carrying 55 passengers and 3 crew, which vanished during its flight on June 23rd of 1950 while flying over Lake Michigan. Then there's the story of Stephen Kubacki. He was a college student on a skiing trip who went missing in 1978. A massive search was launched, but he was nowhere to be found. A little over a whole year went by, and then out of the blue, the guy just shows up again. Even stranger, he had no memory of the time that had passed. Alright, we got some very interesting Bigfoot footage for you next. Yes, there have been a number of Bigfoot sightings in Michigan, and this one happened to be captured on camera by a man named Eddie V, who sent the footage to the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch organization. Alright, so I'd actually never seen this footage before, which I'm kind of surprised by, because it's pretty cool footage. The thing isn't obscured by trees, the camera's not shaky, you very clearly see something walking across the river, and to me, it doesn't look like a bear, it kind of looks like it's carrying something too. Some people say it could be a deer, or maybe a baby Sasquatch, if this is indeed a Sasquatch. I mean, could it be a dude in a suit? That's always a possibility, but I don't know. What do you all think of this one? It's a cool video to me. It kind of looks like almost like it doesn't even have fur or something. I don't know, strange.
Moving on to number 7 now, we have the DJ. This urban legend revolves around a Malaysian radio DJ. He had a late night show in the 90s where listeners could call in to share their ghost stories. One night a man called in to share his story. He said he was driving down a highway late at night with his parents, his wife and their baby. They were all asleep in the back and he felt quite sleepy too. He saw a large truck coming the other way but on his side of the road. It suddenly sped past him, but before he even had time to collect his thoughts, it happened again, and then again, and then again. It happened a few more times, each one as shocking as the last, and then it seemed to change. The truck started appearing behind him now. He realized it was chasing him. He sped up, trying not to panic. As he came over a hill, he suddenly saw a single headlight heading towards him again. He swerved violently to avoid it, but lost control of the car, crashing through the highway barrier and into a deep gully. Then he told the radio DJ that the crash had killed all of his family. He sounded distraught. Then he said the crash took his own life as well. He then hung up the phone. The DJ thought it was just a prank and laughed it off. However, the next day's newspaper had a story on the front page. It said an accident had occurred along the highway, the same one described by the caller. A car had crashed the night before, killing an elderly couple, a husband and wife, and their baby. The DJ was stunned. He felt the hairs stand up on the back of his neck. He rushed to play the tape back from the mystery caller the night before, but all he found was minutes of nothing but silence. Next up at number 6 now, we have the merman. In 2006, shocking pictures began circulating around Malaysian websites that seemed to show what people were describing as a merman. That's a male version of a mermaid. It was supposedly caught by a fisherman in Teluk Buhang Beach in Penang. There were 6 photos of the creature taken from various angles. They were attached to an email that was going around claiming that the newspapers were not being allowed to share these pictures. The merman appears vaguely humanoid in shape and seems to be about the size of an adult male. There were 2 long fins that resembled large ears on its head. It had 2 arms and was covered in fins from head to toe. A while after this, internet investigators claimed that the pictures had come from an eBay sale in Florida, but die-hard conspiracy theorists believe this is all just part of a cover-up and that there are more mermen out there in the Malaysian seas. At number 5 now, guys, we have the oily man. In Malaysian folklore, the oily man is a sort of supernatural being called into life and controlled by an evil witch doctor. It can cover its whole body in a black oily substance that makes him practically invisible at night, difficult to catch, and makes breaking and entering extremely easy for him. It crawls up the walls and the sides of tall buildings. Once on top of them, it leaps from rooftop to rooftop. Some say it's like the Malaysian version of Venom, although the oily man definitely came before that. Before you say this is just an ancient creature passed down through stories, think again. As recently as 2012, there were reports of a knife-wielding oily man leaping from building to building in Malaysia. The residents of Kampung claim to have seen and heard him for 10 days. Moving on to number 4 now, we have the hotel bed. The story goes like this. A group of college friends planned a weekend trip to a Malaysian resort during their break. They booked 1 room with 2 beds, figuring they could save money by fitting 4 people in them. When they reached the resort, they wasted no time in seeing seeing the local attractions for the day, they decided to freshen up back at the hotel before heading out to dinner. While one of them was lying on the bed, they complained that it felt quite lumpy, but they decided to not complain to hotel management because they already had too many people in the room and they didn't want to get caught. After dinner, they headed out to some bars before returning around midnight. When they got back, they got ready for bed. However, when they began to rearrange the mattresses to fit all of them in, they saw something truly horrific. There, sandwiched between the mattress and the bed springs, was the corpse of a woman. They ran out of the room and told hotel management. The hotel were keen to avoid any negative publicity and decided to pay the students a lot of money to keep quiet. Still, this rumor began to spread, and now many young Malaysian people will make sure to check if their hotel mattress ever feels too lumpy. Coming at number 3 now, we have Janet's ghost. The story goes that Janet was a young Chinese nurse in Kuching's public hospital. Legend says she disappeared around the late 1960s. This was at a time when there was an epidemic of kidnappings in the city. All the police had figured out so far was that the kidnappings may be linked to the construction of Satok Bridge. If construction of the bridge was held up, it meant that the territorial spirits were displeased. Human sacrifices had to be made to appease them. Apparently, they preferred to sacrifice virgin girls, but only use their heads. This meant they would be decapitated and their heads would be embedded in the concrete pillars to strengthen the bridge. Eventually, they found Janet's headless body, confirming the police's theory. Her grieving parents buried her in a red dress and red shoes. According to some Chinese belief systems, if a woman dies wearing red, she will return as a vengeful spirit. They say her parents did this so she could return from the dead and take revenge on her killers. Then the sightings began. Villagers on the outskirts of the city reported seeing a mysterious woman dressed all in red. She would catch rides on motorbikes or cross ferries by herself, would always leave behind Chinese hell notes. Her quest to find her killers continues, and she doesn't care who stands in her way. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Toyol. The name for this creature is sometimes translated in English to goblin, but it's not the kind of goblin you're probably thinking of. This thing is much more creepy in my opinion. It's said to be the spirit of a small child invoked from a dead human fetus. It's traditionally described as looking like a near naked baby with brownish skin, large fangs and sharp ears. The Toyols always have a master, and the master may use it to capture other humans. It's said that the owner of the Toyol may become rich beyond their wildest dreams, but there is always a price to pay when it comes to the spirit world. Becoming the master of a Toyol can bring fortune, but the health of every one of the master's family will steadily decline. They will eventually lose everything and then slowly die. The Toyol are evil in their behavior but childlike in their thinking. People use this to try and distract a Toyol from entering their homes. They scatter buttons on the floor, leave sweets or toys next to them in the hopes that a Toyol will pass on and spare them another day. And finally, at number 1 now, we have the horror. Remember we were talking earlier about Karak Highway, the really haunted road? Well, we're returning for another scary story there. One day a couple were traveling down the road to return to their hometown after a relative's wedding. They decided to travel late at night and the journey was going well for a while, but then signs of trouble started. Their trusty Proton Wira began to zigzag wildly on the road. As they struggled to control it, the engine gave a last splutter and then died. The husband was shocked. He had just had the car serviced the day before. Now they were stranded by the road in the middle of the night and only about halfway to their destination. All around them was desolate hills and jungle. They kept trying to start the car over and over again, but nothing seemed to work. They gave up and decided to flag someone down for help. When that didn't work, the husband decided to try and find an emergency phone somewhere. The wife disagreed because she was afraid that he might get knocked down walking in the dark. He went anyway and told his wife to wait in the car. She waited for what felt like forever. The jungle trees seemed to shift in the dark around her. Then there was a loud thump on the roof of the car, followed by a rustling sound. She thought it was animals and decided to not get out of her car to check. Then another car's headlights began to approach from behind. The car slowed down as it passed, but then quickly sped off. She waited for hours. Other cars did the same. She began to worry more about the rustling sound from the roof and where exactly her husband was. Finally, a police car approached. It stopped a few meters away. The policeman got out and called to her using a megaphone, telling her to back away from the car slowly. When she got to the police car, she looked back out of curiosity. To her horror, she saw her husband's body on the roof of the car. There was a demonic creature feasting on his blood. This had been happening for all those hours that she was sitting in the car. The police quickly took her away and the legend began. Starting off number 10 now, we have the Silver Train. This is a true ghost train story. Locals call it the Silver Pilen. In Sweden's capital of Stockholm, legend says that passengers waiting on the platform may see a silver train slowly pull up. You must must not get on it under any circumstances. The train is heading to an abandoned station in the middle of the woods. Its passengers are said to be the souls of the dead. People who get on will never return. The legend is also connected to the abandoned Kim Linge metro station, which is said to be a ghost station. Locals say that only the dead get off at Kim Linge. Some people even believe the silver train takes people to an underground station with no exit. It never returns to pick them up. At number 9 now, we have the Palace of Skifla. Located in the capital of Stockholm, ghosts have been reported in this palace for well over 200 years. Some of the stories involve people seeing mirrors and windows just shattering for no reason at all, as well as music and songs floating down the corridor with no source in sight. One notable story involves a man called Jacob von Balthasar Niji. Try saying that in a hurry. He was a former owner of the palace who was allegedly a worshipper of Satan. He disappeared one night and witnesses said he was last seen entering a black carriage being pulled by a coachman with horns and a tail. Had he sold his soul to the devil? Some people certainly think so. This is just the top of the iceberg when it comes to the creepy goings on here. The palace is now owned by Stockholm University, who use it for storage. That's probably for the best. Coming at number 8 now, we have Borgvattnet Vicarage. Borgvattnet is a small village with just 50 residents there, but apparently a lot of ghosts. It's actually said to have the highest number of ghosts per people anywhere in the country. Perhaps the most haunted spot is the old vicarage. Built in 1876, it seemed like a normal building for some 50 years, and then locals began reporting creepy happenings. Ghosts that are not just scary, they're also violent. Some of the ghosts have reportedly knocked people out of chairs, moved furniture around while people are sleeping, or even one case of a ghost throwing babies out of a window. If that sounds like your idea of fun, you can actually book a room there for a night, and breakfast is included if you make it to the morning.
Next up, we have the urban legend of Nain Rouge, aka the Demon of the Strait. So this kind of falls into the cryptid category as well as folklore, which I always go nuts for. I love hearing about weird creatures that I've never heard of before. Nain Rouge is kind of similar to Mothman in that it seems to show up right before disaster strikes, almost like a harbinger of doom. But this thing isn't a giant moth creature. It's more like your classic red devilish kind of monster, or a hobgoblin as it's sometimes described. This red menace hails from Detroit specifically, and is said to have appeared before major events like the Detroit riots in 1967 and the Battle of Bloody Run in 1763. The first major appearance of the creature is said to have been before Detroit's very own founder, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac. The story goes that he'd seen a fortune teller who told him that he was to respect and appease this goblin-like creature, so he smacked it with his cane and told it to get out of his way. Then his political career took a nosedive, really didn't go so well. He was eventually banished from the city of Detroit. He was imprisoned for a time, lost all his money. Just don't be mean to the goblin monster, I guess. Next on the list, we have melon heads. The melon heads. I talked about these bulbous weirdos during one of my many Ohio urban legend slash cryptid videos. I was glad to get to talk about my little bobble-headed friends again on this list, but it turns out Michigan's brand of melon heads are a little more violent than the Ohio ones. Not something I'm assuming, it's just what I've read. Beginning sometime in the 1950s, tales of these strange, misshapen creatures began to spread around the city of Saugatuck. The story goes that the melon heads were youngsters suffering from hydrocephalus. They were being treated by a rather cruel doctor, and one day they rebelled against their mad doctor, taking his life before eating his remains. And they scuttled off into the forest, where they began living their new life, retreating in tunnels and caves under the city, occasionally coming out to terrorize innocent civilians. Hell's Bridge. So this bridge in Rockford is said to be haunted by demons and ghosts. Double whammy, demons and ghosts. I gotta say, probably best not to go to this bridge. So the tale goes that in the late 1800s, a number of youngsters were going missing in the town. And one night, the townsfolk decided that it might be time to, look for them. So they embarked on a massive search. They left the remaining young ones in town with an old man named Elias Frisk to watch over them while the adults were gone. Well, Frisk was not the innocent, weak old man that he pretended to be. He led the young girls and boys out into the woods, where he eventually revealed to them the location of all their missing little friends. He then took each of their lives one by one before dumping them into the Rogue River. When the townspeople arrived back in town, they found Fisk all alone, muttering to himself in an eerie tone. He was covered in blood and kept repeating the words, "The devil made me do it." Fisk was hanged from the Rockford Bridge, now haunted by the spirits of his victims and the demons that had possessed him. Alright, back to cryptids now with the Torch Lake Monster. In Antrim County, there is a tale of a creature said to stalk the waters of Michigan's longest and deepest inland lake, Torch Lake. Tales of this lake creature are most often told at night around Camp Hiawatha. The creature is also referred to as the Sea Panther, as it has the body of a lizard and the head of a cat, with slimy green skin and two different colored eyes, one blue and one brown. It's said that the creature will rise up from the lake at night to attack unsuspecting fishermen or campers. At best, it'll just chase you off and scare you away. If you're not so lucky though, it may drag you into the depths of the lake, never to be seen again. Next up is the Dogman. Werewolves gotta be my favorite mythological creature, so Dogman sightings get me real excited. The Dogman is a creature said to be, as the name suggests, a part man, part dog creature. It stands about 7 feet tall. What's extra creepy about this creature is that it's said to have a very unnatural howl. It doesn't sound like a wolf or even your classic werewolf. It sounds more like a man's scream, and something about that just sends a shiver up my spine. Monstrous creatures making human-like sounds just gives them this kind of uncanny valley sort of vibe. Very off-putting. There have been apparent Dogman sightings reported ever since 1887, where one witness supposedly died of fright after encountering the creature. There's also another famous story in the 60s where a bunch of hippies were in a van and they saw it peering into their window, though I wouldn't really trust what hippies said, especially in the 60s, because, you know, they were on a lot of stuff, but who knows. Second to last on the list are the singing sands of Abete Gris. The sands of these beautiful beaches in the northern Upper Peninsula are said to sing. And actually, they're not just said to, they really do. When you rub your hands through the sand, it makes this high-pitched whooshing kind of sound, which is not actually a sound you'll get on every beach. So the legend goes that a long time ago, a Native American woman lost her lover in the waters of Lake Superior. She spent countless days returning to the beach, crying out and singing for him in a desperate hope that he would one day find his way back to her. Her cries are said to be heard in the very sand itself to this day. And what makes the singing sand even stranger is that the legend goes if you remove the sand from the beach, take it somewhere else, try and make it sing, it no longer makes any noise. Finally though, we have the old Presque Isle Lighthouse. Nothing more classic than a good old-fashioned lighthouse ghost story. This lighthouse was erected in 1840, but it wasn't in operation for very long. Less than 30 years later, it had fallen into disrepair and was replaced by another lighthouse a little farther up north. In 1977, it became a museum, owned and operated by George and Lorraine Paris. Now, all the wiring had been removed. The lighthouse was no longer operational, but in 1992, just a year after George had passed away, a number of people, from pilots to sailors, had reported seeing a distinct glow coming from the old lighthouse. And passers-by have told stories of spotting a mysterious figure lurking about the lighthouse, only to vanish into thin air. Many locals believe the ghost of George Paris still visits his beloved lighthouse from beyond the grave.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Grunch. This one comes from Louisiana. In the early days of New Orleans, there was a road called Grunch Road that went deep into the swampy woods before coming to a dead end. That is where the Grunch people lived, a strange hybrid of albinos and dwarves, forced away from society and made to live in their own community. As the years went by, people started to doubt the story's authenticity, but it sparked up again when people started disappearing down Grunch Road. Nearby farmers reported their animals missing or finding them dead and drained of blood. Many locals now refuse to head down Grunch Road for fear of meeting the same fate. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Stull Cemetery. To those that know the story, Stull Cemetery in Kansas is better known as the doorway to hell. Legend says that the devil himself chose the cemetery as his entrance from the underworld to our own. Now it's said that a tree once stood in the cemetery and an old tombstone there was inscribed with the word witch. The tree was used to hang condemned witches back in the day who were put to death by the locals. The tombstone apparently marks the burial spot of Satan's own child, a creature born deformed and covered in wolf hair. In modern times, the legend has continued with reports of the ground catching fire in random spots. Pope John Paul II was said to divert his private plane around the cemetery because it was so tainted by evil. Now whether or not you believe all of that, there's plenty of videos on YouTube to check out if you're interested, and I find them quite creepy. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Knock Knock Road. This one is for all of you guys watching that get very creeped out by little girl ghosts. I think they're the worst kind of ghost. Strasburg Road near Detroit has a disturbing tale of murder attached to it. Legend says that a little girl was killed on the road in the 1940s by a hit and run driver. Ever since then, people have reported the same story. They stop at a traffic light and see on the side of the road a young girl standing, just standing and staring right into your car. Whether they freeze or then try to speak to her, she slowly walks forward to the car and stares at you with deep set hollow eyes. She scans your face to try and find her killer and get her revenge. I guess you better hope you just don't look like the killer. Next up at number 7 now, we have Tofteholm Herrgård. Some Swedish people proudly claim this place as the most haunted hotel, not just in Sweden, but in the whole world. Located along the edge of Lake Vikostern, the hotel is picturesque, but comes with a very dark story attached to it. One night, a young man killed himself in one of the hotel's rooms after he was forbidden to marry the daughter of the landowner. He had a secret love affair with her for months, but her father, a very rich baron, refused to give his blessing because he was just a poor commoner. Instead, he married her off to another old baron not too dissimilar from himself. Heartbroken, he hanged himself from the rafters of what is now room 324. While most visitors do just avoid that room, that hasn't stopped them seeing the ghost of the heartbroken man. He is said to wander through the hotel at night, shutting windows and crying out into the darkness. Coming in at number 6 now, we have Gamla Stan. In 1520, the Danish king Christian II invaded Sweden. 92 members of the Swedish royal family refused to obey the invader, and so Christian sentenced them all to death. All 92 of them were either beheaded or hanged in the main square of the old town of Stockholm known as Gamla Stan. Some people say their blood flowed across the cobblestones for months. In the red building nearby, 92 white stones came to represent the 92 Swedish nobles who died. Now, locals believe that if a single stone is removed, the ghost of one of the dead nobles will rise up and haunt the streets of Stockholm forever. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Skogsra. In ancient Swedish folklore, the Skogsra are forest spirits. From the front, they look like a beautiful woman, but from the back, they resemble a tree trunk. There are stories of men who were entranced by these spirits without ever seeing their true form from the back. The Skogsra wear the men down over days and weeks, draining them until they are hopeless, playing on their temptations, their fears and fantasies. If they manage to outsmart the spirit, the men will see their true form from behind and the Skogsra will disappear forever. If they do not, they are carried off into the woods at their weakest, never to be seen again. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Millingar. These are said to be the undead corpses of ghosts of infants murdered by their mothers. They haunt the places where they were buried with cries that pierce the night air. Why do they cry? Well, they want you to give them a name. They were often babies that were said to be killed before receiving a name, and now that's all they want. They'll ask you to carry them to hallowed ground to be buried. They then grow in size as you get closer. There have been stories of these undead babies asking people for other tasks on the road at night. If they don't perform the tasks, the person will often return home to find a member of their family has been killed, often in the same theme as the original request. I will go into some of the details I saw, but they really are gruesome. All you guys need to know is that they are zombie babies. Not two words you want to hear together. Coming at number 3 now, we have the Neek. Also known as the Nokken or Niken, this is a mysterious water creature that always crops up in Scandinavian folklore. In Swedish tradition, the Neek lives in freshwater lakes and deep ponds. They are shapeshifters and will often transform into a handsome young man. They then trick women into jumping into the water before drowning them. There are also other versions versions of the legend that involve him changing into a white horse to let children ride on his back before jumping into his pond to drown them too. Some people believe the only way to save yourself is to throw metal in the water, something like a needle or an iron cross. Next up at number 2 now we have Stockholm's Royal Palace. As you might expect from a palace, this place is huge. Many of its 1,400 rooms come with some of Sweden's most famous ghost stories. Among them is the White Lady. Her name in real life was Vita Frun. She is said to appear anytime a member of Sweden's royal family dies. King Oscar once wrote that she is tall, wears a long white dress with a white veil and dark gloves. She wanders the rooms and hallways clutching a ring of keys which jangle and echo in the night. In 1971, Princess Eugenie saw the White Lady 3 days before the death of Queen Louise. Over half a century before that, she was also said to appear as Princess Margaret lay dying. Despite not actually being dead yet, a guard saw the White Lady standing on the roof of the palace, keys in hand. 2 hours later, the princess was dead. And finally, number 1 now, we have Svenholm Castle. This is another castle in southern Sweden known for its high concentration of ghosts. Perhaps the most famous is King Frederick II, who is said to wander the halls at night searching for his long lost love who he never married. Then there are 3 ladies. In previous urban legend videos, you guys may have heard me talk about a castle or a house with the White Lady or the Black Lady or maybe the Grey Lady ghost, things like that. Well, how about all 3 of them? That's right. Visitors to Svenholm Castle have reported 3 separate ghost ladies. Some even say they compete for each other's territory. Another regular on the scene is said to be the Grey Monk, who was murdered in the castle in the 1500s and now occasionally helps staff carry heavy items up the stairs from the cellars. Is that not the most helpful ghost you've ever heard of? I say all ghosts should be put to work. Just kidding. Let them do their thing.